It started with something I almost ignored. A small detail. Something so ordinary that most people wouldn't think twice about it. A car. Just a car parked on the side of the street. I had lived on this quiet road for years, where the same families kept their curtains half open at night, where the streetlights hummed with an almost comforting buzz, where nothing ever really happened. But then I noticed the car. It was an old sedan, the kind of model you don't really see much anymore. A faded brown color that could have once been maroon, dulled by time and weather until it blended into the night itself. The paint seemed tired, matte where it should have reflected, as if every layer of gloss had been stripped away. The headlights, clouded over with age, glinted faintly under the amber streetlights. The first night I saw it, I assumed it belonged to someone visiting a neighbor. But when I looked again, hours later around midnight, it was still there, parked in the exact same spot, right across from my house. The second night, it was there again. Same spot, same angle, as if it hadn't moved an inch. By the third night, it became impossible to ignore. I began to notice little things. The way the interior was always too dark to see into, even when the streetlight hit the windshield just right. The way the car itself seemed to hum with a kind of stillness, as though it were waiting. And then there was the smell. The third night, I stepped outside just to grab something from my car, and as I passed the edge of my driveway, I caught the faintest trace of something sharp in the air. It wasn't exhaust, at least not fresh. It was older, staler, like the lingering odor of gasoline soaked into fabric, a sour chemical tang that clung to the night breeze. I turned my head instinctively toward the old sedan, and for a second, I thought I saw something. Just a flicker, a shifting shadow behind the glass. But when I blinked, the windows were black again. I went inside quickly that night. By the end of the first week, the car had established its presence. Every night, right after dusk, it would be there, parked in the exact same place, motionless. No one ever saw it arrive, and no one ever saw it leave. In the mornings, when the street was alive with joggers and kids heading off to school, it would be gone. Completely gone, as if it had never existed. I started keeping watch from my window. Sitting in the darkness of my bedroom, I would part the blinds just enough to peek outside. My eyes would fix on the outline of that car. I waited, sometimes for hours, just staring into the night, trying to catch some hint of movement. But the car never moved. What unsettled me most was the stillness. I would look for signs of life inside, some faint glow of a dashboard, the glint of a face caught in the light, even the smallest twitch of movement, but there was nothing. It was like staring at a hollow shell. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside was staring back. Nights began to change for me. I couldn't fall asleep easily anymore. My body stayed tense, my ears straining against the silence of the house. The refrigerator's hum, the creak of the old wooden floorboards, the faint tapping of tree branches against the window, all of it became magnified. And always beneath those sounds was the deeper awareness that outside, across the street, the sedan waited. Sometimes I would swear I heard things from it. The faint click of metal, a seat shifting. Once, I could have sworn I heard the distant hum of the engine turning over, but when I looked out, the car was dark, lifeless. The smell returned too, more insistent, that chemical tang of old gasoline and stale air. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night with the scent lingering in my nostrils, as though it had seeped through the cracks of the walls themselves. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it belonged to someone working a night shift. Maybe someone parked there to sleep, though why they would choose the same exact spot every night, I couldn't say. But there were details that refused to line up. The tires, for one. On the nights when I forced myself to get closer, to peer from the end of my driveway, I noticed the tires always looked wrong. They weren't deflated, but they seemed heavy, as if pressing too deeply into the pavement, the weight of the car more than it should have been. And the rims were rusted to a dark orange, the kind of decay that takes years, though the body of the car itself, despite being old, was intact. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound I can only describe as breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. It wasn't coming from inside my house. It was coming from outside, faint but undeniable. I got up and looked through the blinds again, and the car was there, exactly where it always was. Only this time I noticed something different. The windshield was fogged, as though someone inside was exhaling against the glass. I froze, staring, my own breath caught in my chest. The fog spread, slowly, until the faint outline of a handprint appeared in the condensation, pressed from the inside. That was the first time I couldn't deny it anymore. Someone, or something, was inside the sedan, watching, waiting. From that night forward, the car was no longer just a nuisance. It was a presence, a looming, uninvited guest that returned without fail. I could feel my sanity thinning around its edges. Every evening, when the sun dipped below the houses and the street lamps buzzed to life, I would glance outside and know it was there again. I stopped sleeping altogether. My nights became long vigils, my eyes bloodshot from staring through blinds, my skin prickling with the constant sense of being observed. Sometimes, when exhaustion overtook me, I'd jolt awake in my bed to find the blinds slightly more open than I remembered leaving them. And then came the knocking. The first time it was subtle, 3 faint taps coming from the direction of my front door. I rushed to it, heart hammering, but when I looked through the peephole, the porch was empty. Across the street, the sedan sat silently, its windows black. The knocking returned the next night. Louder, sharper, always in sets of 3. And always, when I checked, there was no one there. I stopped answering. I sat frozen in my room instead, listening as the knocks grew more insistent, more demanding, echoing through the stillness of the house. Until finally one night, I realized the sound wasn't coming from the front door at all. It was coming from the glass of my bedroom window. Just 3 taps. Right against the pane. My body locked in place. I turned slowly, dread spreading cold through my chest, and through the thin curtain, I saw it, an outline. A figure standing just beyond the glass. And when I gathered the courage to pull the curtain aside, my eyes widened in terror. The old sedan was gone, and the street outside was empty. I live in a quiet neighborhood. Too quiet sometimes. The kind of place where the hum of insects feels louder than the passing of traffic, where porch lights burn into empty yards without purpose, and where the silence carries weight, pressing into your ears until even the sound of your own breathing feels intrusive. It was on one of those nights, still and cold, that I noticed the car. It wasn't unusual for cars to be parked along the street. People had visitors, deliveries came late sometimes, and teenagers occasionally left their cars idling while they ran into houses. But this one was different. It was parked directly across the street from my house, in the exact spot where the pale glow of the streetlight barely reached. The car was older, a dull shade of blue or maybe gray. It was hard to tell in the uneven light. What made it strange wasn't that it was there, but that someone was sitting in the back seat. At first, I wasn't sure. The windows were tinted, coated with grime, and the reflection of the streetlight made it harder to see inside. But when I shifted slightly, standing in the darkness of my living room with only a corner of the curtain pulled aside, I saw the outline. Shoulders hunched, a head tilted ever so slightly forward, perfectly still, as if carved out of shadow. I stood there for a long time, longer than I should have, staring at that unmoving shape. There was no motion, no sign of life, just the sense of someone being there, watching, waiting. The hours crawled by. I would glance away, try to distract myself with the television, only to find myself drawn back to the window. The car hadn't moved. The figure hadn't shifted. It was as though the night itself had placed it there, a fixture just as permanent as the streetlight or the rusted mailbox leaning slightly toward the curb. The longer I watched, the stranger it felt. The figure was too still, too patient. It was not the restless posture of someone waiting for a ride or scrolling through their phone. It was rigid, statuesque, as though it had no intention of moving at all. I remember the way the air in the house felt heavier, how the silence seemed to grow deeper. Every creak of the walls, every groan of the wooden floor made me feel exposed, like I was the one being observed. My curtains suddenly felt thin, almost transparent, as though the figure in the car could see me clearly, while I could barely make out its form. At some point, I began to notice the details of the night in a sharper, almost oppressive way. The faint buzz of the streetlight, the way moths fluttered around its glow, sometimes hitting the glass with tiny, hollow taps. The way the cool air seeped through the cracks near the windowsill, carrying with it the faint smell of damp leaves and exhaust. My heart was beating harder than it should have, like I had run up a flight of stairs, though I was standing perfectly still. I told myself to stop looking, to walk away, to go upstairs, close my eyes, and let the night pass like any other. But I couldn't. The idea of turning my back felt unbearable. What if the figure left the car the moment I stepped away? What if it crossed the street, moving silently, waiting for me to let my guard down? The hours stretched thinner. Midnight bled into the small, stagnant hours where the world feels like it has forgotten itself. Time seemed to drip, slow and uneven, like water from a faucet that never shuts completely. Still, the car remained. Still, the figure didn't move. Every so often, the streetlight would flicker, and in those brief moments of darkness, I thought I could see the shape of a face, pale and smooth, pressed near the glass. A reflection, maybe, or a trick of my exhausted eyes. But the image carved itself into my mind, the suggestion of hollow eyes fixed on me, unblinking. I began to hear things I couldn't explain. A faint thump, as though something shifted inside the car. A sound like fingers tapping slowly against glass, muffled by distance. Once, I thought I heard the faint creak of the car's door handle being pulled, though no door opened. Each sound made the back of my neck tighten, made the hairs on my arms stand upright. I didn't open the door. I didn't step outside. The idea of being under the open sky, crossing the empty street with nothing but the sound of my own footsteps. It filled me with a kind of dread I can't describe. The door stayed locked. The lights stayed off. I only watched, hour after hour, my body stiff and my eyes dry from refusing to blink. Eventually, I realized I wasn't sure when I had last seen the figure move. Had it shifted at all? Was it truly someone, or was it just the shape of piled clothing, a trick of shadow and imagination? I wanted to believe that. I wanted to convince myself I had been staring at nothing, obsessing over nothing. But then, just as the sky began to pale with the first suggestion of dawn, the figure moved. Not much, just a tilt of the head, slow and deliberate, as though acknowledging me. The kind of movement that leaves no doubt. That single shift destroyed every comforting lie I had tried to build through the night. It was there. It had been there the entire time. By the time the sun had risen, the car was gone. No sound of an engine starting, no tires crunching against the pavement. One moment it was there, and the next it wasn't. The space across the street was empty, bathed in the gray light of morning, as though nothing had ever been there at all. I didn't sleep that day, or the next night, or the night after. Every evening since, I checked the window. I leave the curtain cracked, just enough to see the street. And sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I think I see the shape again. The outline of a car. The suggestion of a figure waiting patiently inside. It hasn't returned fully, not yet. But I know it will. Things like that don't simply vanish. They wait. They watch. And sooner or later, they come back. It started as something small, something I almost brushed off as coincidence. I was leaving work late, the sky dim with the last shades of orange melting into gray, when I noticed a van idling near the corner of the parking lot. It wasn't unusual for vehicles to linger. Sometimes co-workers waited for rides. Sometimes people cut across the lot to grab food from the small diner across the street. But the van didn't belong. It wasn't any car I had seen before, and there was something about the way it sat there, unmoving, yet waiting. I didn't think much of it until I backed out of my spot and saw its headlights flicker on in the rearview mirror. A boxy shape, old, maybe from the late 90s. Paint the color of dull bone, a little rust along the edges of the wheel wells. The kind of van you'd expect to see stuffed with tools, maybe an old work vehicle someone forgot to retire. Except the windows were tinted, darker than they should have been, and no stickers, no signs, nothing to identify it. I drove slowly toward the street, telling myself it was nothing. That's always what I tell myself, because if you look for patterns in the shadows, you'll start finding them everywhere. But as I turned out onto the road, the van pulled out too. Not just casually, but in perfect sync, like it had been waiting for my move. The route from my workplace to home was simple, a stretch of main road before it forked into quieter neighborhoods. Street lights hummed overhead, their glow patchy, flickering in places. I checked the mirror. The van kept its distance, not tailgating, but never too far. Every time I switched lanes, so did it. Each turn I made, it echoed. The hum of my tires against the pavement became louder in my ears, like the sound was growing under my skin. My hands tightened on the wheel, palms slightly damp, though I told myself again and again it was nothing. People drive similar routes all the time. Maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe it was heading the same way. But coincidence shouldn't feel this deliberate. I rolled down the window just a crack, and the smell of the night air drifted in. Cold, faintly metallic, like rain had touched the asphalt hours before and hadn't quite left. I listened carefully. Behind the rhythm of my own car was the steady hum of another engine. Low, grumbling, mechanical. The van's. It didn't waver, didn't pass, didn't back off. When I reached the first intersection, I slowed and signaled right. My chest tightened when I saw the glow of the van's headlights tilt in the mirror, following the curve of my blinker. I changed my route, doubling back on streets I never usually took, letting instinct guide me. Still, the van remained. Not aggressive, not closing the distance, but like a shadow tethered to me. By the time I reached my neighborhood, every hair on my arms was standing. The houses were quiet, tucked behind drawn curtains and warm yellow light. My street was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass comfortably. I eased into it, heart thumping, and almost screamed when I saw the van turn in behind me. There was no reason for it to be here. No reason at all. I drove past my own driveway. My chest tightened at the thought of pulling in, of giving away where I lived. The van crept after me, steady, silent, just far enough to not seem obvious, but close enough that there was no mistaking the intent. I looped through the neighborhood, each curve of the road illuminated by my headlights sweeping across empty yards, trees whispering in the night breeze, shadows shifting like figures waiting to be seen. Still the van stayed behind. When I finally returned to the main road, it followed. I kept driving, farther than I ever meant to, away from the familiarity of home, deeper into stretches of road that grew darker, where the glow of streetlights was scattered and the night felt heavier. I don't remember how long this lasted. Minutes stretched into hours in my mind, the steady pressure of being pursued pressing down on me, suffocating. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, my ears straining against every sound, the low grumble of its engine, the faint rattle in its frame, even the way its headlights seemed unnaturally white, glaring in the mirror like staring eyes. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station, the kind lit up too brightly, buzzing with the drone of fluorescent lights. I parked near the pump, engine still running, pretending I was just stopping for fuel. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked in the mirror. The van drove past. Slowly. Too slowly. It didn't stop, didn't park, didn't circle back right away. It just glided by, its tinted windows giving nothing away. And then it vanished down the road. I stayed there for nearly half an hour, waiting, staring at every car that passed, scanning every shadow that stretched across the glowing pavement. My ears rang with the buzz of lights overhead, my skin itching with paranoia. Finally, when I felt sure enough, I drove home. My neighborhood was quiet, the van nowhere in sight. I pulled into the driveway, locked every door, checked the blinds twice. But the sense of eyes on me didn't fade. It clung like a film to my skin, a pressure that refused to lift. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt louder, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the old pipes. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, stretching across the walls, bending into shapes I didn't want to imagine. The next day at work, I laughed it off to myself. Paranoia. That's all it had been. A stranger driving the same route. Nothing more. Nothing sinister. Nothing real. But when I left work that evening, heart finally calm, breath steady, I saw it again. The van, parked in the exact same spot. And when I pulled out, so did it. Its headlights flared in the mirror, white and sharp, and the hum of its engine returned like a memory I couldn't escape. And that's when I knew it wasn't coincidence. It never had been. It was waiting. It was following. And for nights after that, it never stopped. I remember the first time I noticed it. The playground near my apartment complex had always been an ordinary place. Rusting swings that creaked when the wind blew. A metal slide that held the heat of the day long into the evening, burning the palms of any kid foolish enough to touch it. The smell of damp mulch that never quite dried, no matter how hot the sun got. It was the kind of place you stopped noticing when you walked by every day. But the car made me notice. It was an old sedan, dark-colored, maybe black or a deep blue, though it was hard to tell under the dim glow of the streetlights. The first detail that stuck out to me wasn't the make or model. It was the windows, tinted so dark that they didn't reflect the lamps around them. They swallowed light instead of catching it. From certain angles, the windows looked like holes in the world, like I was staring into nothingness. The car sat parked along the curb, right in front of the chain-link fence that surrounded the playground. No movement, no engine sound, just sitting there. I told myself it belonged to someone in the neighborhood. Maybe a parent waiting for their kid to finish playing. That was a reasonable thought. That was a safe thought. But the problem was, this wasn't during the day. It wasn't even the early evening. The first time I saw it, it was almost midnight. I had been walking home after a late shift. The playground was deserted, silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Yet the car was there, engine off, lights off, like it had been dropped into place and forgotten. I kept walking that night, forcing myself not to slow down, not to stare too long. But as I passed it, I felt something. That sensation you get when someone's eyes are on you. A pressure at the back of your neck. It made the tiny hairs on my arms rise. I didn't see anyone inside. The glass was too dark. I told myself no one was in there at all. But the air carried that quiet, heavy tension I've only ever felt when being watched. I went home, locked the door, and tried to shake it off. But the next night, it was there again. Same spot, same posture, like a predator crouching low in the grass. I started noticing small details. The way the playground lights flickered, buzzing faintly, always seeming weaker when the car was present. The way the night air smelled faintly of exhaust, though I never once heard the car start. The way the shadows bent strangely along the chain-link fence, as if the car's outline warped the light itself. Each time I passed, my chest tightened, and my eyes burned from staring too hard into the black void of the windows. I never caught a face, never caught movement, just a vague sense that something was behind that glass, close, silent, and patient. After a week, I began to dread my walk home. I'd take longer routes, cutting through side streets, but no matter what angle I approached from, the car was there. Always at the playground, always at night. One evening, I tried to outsmart it. I lingered at the edge of the block, standing half hidden behind a tree just to watch. I thought maybe I'd see someone get out, or the car would eventually leave, proving it was just some night owl waiting for something harmless. But it never moved. Minutes stretched into an hour. My eyes strained against the dark, trying to pierce the tint, but it was like staring into a void. No silhouettes, no shapes shifting behind the glass. Just that crushing certainty that if I got too close, if I pressed my face to the window, something would be there, staring back at me from only inches away. When I finally tore myself from that spot and hurried home, my clothes clung with the sour scent of my own sweat, and my mouth tasted of iron from how hard I'd been biting my tongue. I started hearing things after that. Not words, not even sounds I could name, just faint patterns. The car had a way of making the silence louder. I'd walk past, pretending not to look, and in the stillness I'd hear something under the hum of the street lamps. A low clicking, not steady but irregular. Nails tapping against glass, knuckles against the dashboard. My mind tried to explain it away, but every night, the clicking grew sharper, more deliberate. It was worst when I slowed my steps. The sound seemed to follow the rhythm of my heartbeat, quickening when I felt the urge to run. The worst part wasn't the car itself. It was the growing knowledge that I was the only one who noticed. Neighbors walked their dogs right past it. Kids rode their bikes by during the day. Not one person ever stopped, ever glanced at it like I did. I even asked casually at the corner store if anyone had seen that dark sedan near the playground, but they just blinked at me, confused, like I'd mentioned something invisible. By then, I had no doubt. It was waiting for me. One night, I tried something reckless. Instead of hurrying past, I stopped directly across the street from it. The playground gate creaked faintly in the wind behind me. The air smelled of rust and old mulch. My skin prickled. I stood there, staring at the car. And for the first time, the car reacted. The faintest ripple passed across the tinted glass, like a shape shifting inside. It was too fast to catch clearly, too vague to define, but enough to freeze me in place. The clicking grew louder, rapid now, like someone drumming fingers impatiently. And then, two faint points of reflection, low near the rear window. Not the reflection of the streetlights. Smaller, sharper, like eyes catching the light. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the curb. My vision blurred with sudden tears, though I wasn't crying. It was like my body wanted to block out what I had seen. When I finally broke into a run, I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, locking the door, pulling the curtains shut, listening to the blood pound in my ears. That night, I swore I'd avoid the playground altogether. I swore I'd never look at the car again. But curiosity doesn't let go that easily. The next time I passed, weeks later, I forced myself not to look. My head stayed down, my steps quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door handle twitch. Not fully move, just twitch. Like a muscle spasm. I never heard the door open. But in the days that followed, I started seeing things farther from the playground. A dark shape at the end of my street, half hidden between two parked trucks. The faint glint of tinted glass behind the grocery store when I left late one night. A reflection in a puddle that vanished when I turned to check. It wasn't just waiting anymore. It was following. Now I rarely sleep at night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. That faint, irregular clicking. Nails. Knuckles. Impatient. Always keeping rhythm with my pulse. And sometimes, when I glance through the blinds at 2 in the morning, there it is. Not by the playground anymore, but parked right outside my building. Same dark windows. Same silence. Waiting. For me. It started as nothing more than an inconvenience. A pair of headlights, too bright, cutting through the thin curtains of my bedroom window late at night. At first, I thought it was just someone who had parked badly on the street, maybe a neighbor too tired to bother adjusting their car. But then I realized the lights weren't angled like normal headlights. They weren't cast onto the road in front of the car. They were aimed directly at my house, directly at my window. The glow filled the room with a pale, artificial daylight, stark and cold. My furniture warped into long silhouettes across the walls, stretching toward me like crooked fingers. I pulled the curtain tighter, trying to block the intrusion, but the brightness still leaked in through the thin fabric. I lay back in bed, restless, pretending I could ignore it. But it stayed. Not a passing car. Not someone turning around. Just headlights locked on me. Minutes slipped into an hour. The house settled into its usual nighttime silence. The creak of wood. The occasional hum of the refrigerator downstairs. But that light never dimmed. I shifted restlessly, and when I sat up again, curiosity forced me to part the curtain with 2 fingers. There it was. A sedan, old but not ancient, its paint swallowed in the darkness. Only the gleam of those headlights betrayed its shape. My eyes strained, trying to see through the glare into the windshield. It took me a moment, but I swear I saw it, a silhouette in the driver's seat. Not moving, not fidgeting with anything, just sitting. The human body has a way of knowing when it's being observed. It's like a static charge, invisible but undeniable, crawling over your skin, making every hair rise. I felt it then, an almost tangible thread stretched between that figure in the car and me in my bed. Whoever it was, they weren't there by accident. I pulled away from the curtain, heart stuttering. I sat in the dark, trying to think of a rational explanation. Maybe they were waiting for someone. Maybe they fell asleep behind the wheel. But the longer I considered it, the less sense it made. No one waits outside a random house for hours, and no one falls asleep with their headlights perfectly trained on a stranger's window. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I slept badly in fits, waking every hour to peek again. Each time, the lights were still there, the figure still inside. Only when the first hints of dawn bled across the sky did I notice the car was gone. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the figure, that it was just some weird coincidence. But coincidences don't return the following night, because the next evening, as the street outside went quiet and my house sank into stillness, the glow came again. That same colorless light pouring through the curtains. I didn't even try to sleep this time. I went straight to the window. The same car, the same headlights, the same silent driver sitting in the shadows behind the glass. Up close, I could make out more. The way the figure leaned slightly forward, posture stiff, like they were focused on me with every ounce of their attention. I could almost make out the face, or maybe I only imagined I could. The headlights made the glass glare, hiding details, but I swore I saw the faintest suggestion of eyes. Hours passed. The world outside my little square of glass was locked in that tableau. Me behind my curtain, them behind their windshield. My house felt less like a home and more like a fishbowl, their gaze the invisible glass pressing against me. When dawn returned, they vanished again. It became a ritual after that. Not every night, but often enough. Always unannounced. Always the same car, the same headlights fixed on my window. Sometimes it came 2 nights in a row. Sometimes a week would pass, and just when I thought it was over, the beams would flood my room again, jarring me awake. The routine changed me. I began living with the constant dread of evening. As the sun fell, my body tensed, waiting for it. I stopped opening my blinds during the day, convinced they were out there even when I couldn't see. I started hearing phantom sounds, soft taps on the glass, the faint hum of an idling engine even when it wasn't there. My nerves frayed into something raw and trembling. The worst night came when I finally gathered enough nerve to really look. I stood in the dark, one hand clutching the curtain, and pulled it wide enough to peer straight down. The car was closer than usual. Instead of parking across the street, it was angled at the curb directly in front of my house. The headlights poured across my yard like liquid light, bleaching the grass pale. I leaned toward the window, trying to catch a glimpse past the glare. The driver was there. Closer now, the shape of the head distinct, shoulders squared. And this time, there was no mistaking it. The face was angled upward, aimed directly at me. I froze, breath lodged in my throat. Their stillness was unnatural. No one can sit perfectly motionless like that. No fidgeting hands. No subtle rise and fall of shoulders. Just frozen in the act of looking, like a photograph pressed behind glass. A sour smell reached me, faint but undeniable. I thought at first it was my imagination. But the more I sniffed the air, the more I knew it was real. A chemical metallic odor, like overheated wiring or battery acid. It didn't belong in my bedroom. It leaked in from outside, from that idling car. I stumbled back, the sudden terror clenching every muscle. I refused to look again. I locked myself in the bathroom until the sky brightened. But the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was what I began to notice after. Small signs, almost too easy to dismiss. The faint marks on the asphalt where tires had been, always in the same spot. The flattened patch of grass at the edge of my yard, like someone had stepped there night after night. Once, when I finally went outside in daylight, I found something under my window, a single coin. Old, tarnished, foreign. It hadn't been there the day before. I tried to stay elsewhere. Friends' houses, cheap motels, anywhere but home. But no matter where I went, the pattern followed. I'd wake in a strange bed, drawn to the faint glow outside. Pull back a curtain, and there it was again. The headlights. The car. The driver watching. Distance didn't matter. Town to town, mile after mile, it found me. I stopped trying to outrun it. My life shrank into paranoia. Curtains always drawn, lights always off, nights spent wide awake staring into the dark. I never saw the driver's face clearly. I think that's the only reason I'm still sane. But sometimes, when I wake from uneasy sleep, I can still feel the echo of those headlights pressed against my eyelids. A brightness that isn't there, and the weight of eyes that never blink. Because somewhere out there, on some empty road, that car is waiting again. Engine idling. Headlights on. The driver sitting silently in the dark, watching, always watching. And I know they'll come back. They always do. It started with a sound. Not loud. Not even out of place at first. Just the low, rattling growl of an old engine somewhere behind me as I walked home. The kind of sound you'd hear on any street where old vehicles still struggled to stay alive. An uneven, choking rhythm like metal coughing its last breath. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it hadn't followed me. The night air was cool, heavy with the faint smell of damp grass and exhaust fumes lingering low in the neighborhood. The streetlights gave off that sickly orange glow, the kind that makes everything feel more hollow, less real. Houses stood like dark silhouettes, most with their blinds drawn tight. Porch lights were rare, scattered pockets of dim safety. Beyond that, the street was long, narrow, and quiet. Too quiet. The sound of the truck rolled up again, closer this time. Tires crunching against loose gravel. The frame of the vehicle squeaking with age. I didn't want to look back right away. I just listened, forcing myself to keep walking at the same pace. My shoes against the sidewalk, steady. My breathing shallow, but even. The truck slowed when I slowed, its engine dropping to a low rumble, then picking back up again when I started moving faster. Finally, I glanced over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. A rusty old pickup, paint flaking off in patches of dull brown and orange, headlights dim but glaring straight at me. The front grille was crooked, one of the headlights slightly lower than the other, as if the truck itself had been in too many accidents and was barely held together. The windows were tinted darker than they should have been, but I caught the faintest glimmer of movement inside. A shape, a silhouette hunched over the wheel. The moment my eyes met the vehicle, it slowed to an unnatural crawl, coasting just far enough back to keep me in its line of sight, but not enough to pass me. My stomach tightened. My skin prickled. That wasn't coincidence. I turned forward again, trying to ignore it. The sound of the engine followed like a shadow. A stray cat darted across the street ahead of me, disappearing between two houses, but even that sharp burst of movement didn't pull the driver's attention. The truck stayed with me, steady and patient. There's something about being followed in a neighborhood you've always thought of as safe. The familiarity turns against you. Every corner you round, every mailbox, every dark driveway becomes something else, something watching, something waiting. I passed a row of trash bins lined up for collection, the faint sour smell of rotting food seeping into the air. Behind me, the truck slowed again, the squeal of old brakes sharp enough to cut through the silence. I tried to tell myself to stay calm. Maybe the driver lived nearby. Maybe they just happened to be heading the same way. But every step I took deeper into the neighborhood, the more that fragile excuse fell apart. Because I knew the area. I knew which streets led where. And I knew the truck had no reason to be matching me this closely unless it was deliberate. I reached an intersection. The street split off into two directions. Left led deeper into the houses, dead ends, and cul-de-sacs. Right led toward the main road, the faint glow of traffic lights in the distance. My body screamed at me to take the right, to get closer to people, closer to movement. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I broke into a run, if I made it obvious I was scared, the driver would act. So instead, I went left. The truck followed. The houses on this stretch were older, set farther apart. Lawns looked less cared for, weeds creeping up against fences, porch lights either burned out or left off entirely. The pavement was cracked, tufts of grass forcing their way through the gaps. My footsteps felt louder here, echoing against the empty dark. Behind me, the truck crawled along. Its headlights stretched long shadows of my body across the pavement, stretching and shrinking with every move I made. That was when the smell hit me. A faint stench, like burnt oil mixed with rust and wet metal. It came from the truck. Every time it edged closer, the scent of decay and machinery coated the air, clinging to my throat, souring the back of my tongue. I fought the urge to gag. I cut across the street, pretending to casually check my phone as if I had somewhere to be, someone waiting for me. But my fingers were stiff. My hands trembled. The screen's glow lit up my face in the dark, but I didn't dial a number. I just held it, useless, like a prop to convince myself I wasn't as alone as I was. The truck slowed again, rolling to the side of the road. It idled there, engine chugging low and uneven, as if daring me to glance back. I could feel eyes. I didn't need to see them to know. That thick, crawling sensation crept down my spine, the feeling of being studied, measured, dissected from afar. I quickened my pace. Not running, not yet, but faster. My shoes slapped harder against the pavement, and the sound echoed between the houses. My throat was tight, dry. Every breath rasped in my chest. I kept waiting for the sudden roar of the truck, the burst of acceleration as it lunged forward. But it didn't come. It just waited. I turned another corner, slipping into a darker stretch where the streetlights thinned out. My neighborhood wasn't large, but it was easy to get lost in the grid of nearly identical houses and narrow lanes. My only thought was to outpace the truck, to cut through backyards if I had to, anything to shake it. That was when I heard the tires again. Slow, crunching gravel. Following. I darted my eyes to the side, looking for a place to hide. Most of the houses had tall fences, locked gates. A few yards were littered with toys left behind by children, now still and lifeless in the night. I didn't want to be caught crouching behind a swing set while those dim headlights rolled past. So I kept walking. My body screamed for me to run, but my instincts forced me to hold back. If I ran, I knew it would follow faster. The truck wasn't trying to catch me. Not yet. It was hurting me, testing how far I'd go. The silence pressed down on me. No crickets. No dogs barking. Even the wind seemed to have died. The only thing alive in that entire stretch of night was me, and the truck. When I finally reached my street, my chest tightened with dread. Because there it was, waiting, parked at the far end, angled toward my house as if it had known all along where I lived. Its headlights dimmed but still lit, glowing faintly like a pair of watching eyes. I froze. My mouth went dry. That heavy smell of rust and oil drifted down the street even from here. The truck didn't move. It just sat there, engine barely audible, a faint metallic ticking echoing in the night, as if the machine itself was breathing. I couldn't bring myself to walk forward. Every instinct told me if I moved closer, something would happen. So I stood there, frozen, staring at the rusty pickup truck that had followed me through every corner, every shadow, every stretch of silence. And inside, behind that blackened glass, I knew someone was smiling. It began as something small, something I almost laughed at when I first noticed it. Just a car. A plain black car, parked at the corner of my apartment block, beneath the rusting streetlight that flickered in the hours after dusk. I thought nothing of it at first. After all, cars parked there all the time. The space wasn't private, it wasn't marked, it wasn't restricted. But what caught my attention wasn't the car itself. It was the way it didn't leave. The first night, I barely registered it. A four-door black sedan with paint so dull it swallowed the glow of the streetlight. I passed it walking home from the convenience store, plastic bag cutting into my palm, and glanced at its windows. They were tinted, not too dark, but just enough to blur whatever might have been inside. My reflection stared back at me, distorted by the curve of the glass. I walked past, the sound of my sneakers tapping against the cracked pavement, and forgot about it. But the next night, it was there again. Same spot, same angle, same silence. The air around it always felt oddly still, as though the hum of the city had chosen to skip that corner. It became a routine thing. Day after day, night after night, that car was there. Always there. Never moved. Sometimes I'd pass it in the morning, frost collecting on its hood while the rest of the street began to melt into the day. Other times, I'd see it late at night, the dull paint catching only the faintest orange shimmer from the lamp above. No matter the hour, no matter the weather, it remained. At first, I joked about it to myself. Some neighbor must be leaving it there. Someone who worked long shifts or didn't drive often. But days stretched into weeks, and the car never shifted even an inch. No door ever opened. No engine ever coughed awake. No one ever brushed the dew from the windshield. It was as if the car had been placed there and abandoned, but not in the usual way cars are abandoned, with dust collecting on the paint or flat tires sinking into the asphalt. This car looked almost preserved, frozen in time. I began noticing details I hadn't seen before. The way the front grille seemed too wide, as if it smiled with its teeth bared. The way its headlights caught faint glimmers, even when they shouldn't, like the glass was reflecting something that wasn't there. The way its tinted windows looked darker on some nights, as if something behind them had drawn closer to the glass, blotting out the weak reflections. And then there was the feeling, that creeping sensation of being watched whenever I crossed its path. It wasn't immediate, not like a sudden jolt of fear, but something slower, a slow tightening of the chest, a weight pressing on the back of my neck. I would glance over, trying to catch movement, but all I'd see was myself faintly staring back from the glass. Still, I couldn't shake it. That car wasn't just parked. It was waiting. I began to adjust my habits. I'd take longer routes just to avoid passing it. I'd linger inside the stairwell of my apartment, listening for any shift of sound outside before stepping onto the street. Yet no matter how I tried to ignore it, the car loomed at the corner. The worst part came at night. My apartment wasn't on a high floor, only the third, and my bedroom window faced the corner. I couldn't see the car directly unless I leaned out at an angle, but I knew it was there. The glow of the flickering street lamp would paint strange shadows across my curtains, shifting shapes that stretched and shrank in unnatural ways. Sometimes, lying in bed, I'd swear I heard the faintest hum. Not an engine, not really. More like the electric buzz of headlights just waiting to be switched on. Weeks turned into months, and with every passing day, the car began to feel less like a background oddity and more like a presence. Something that didn't belong to the normal world. Something that had settled into that corner for reasons I couldn't understand. I tried telling myself to forget about it, to treat it like nothing more than a nuisance, a trick of my imagination. But then the signs grew sharper. One morning, when I left for work, I noticed the condensation on the windshield. Perfectly fogged except for two clear ovals. Ovals the exact shape and distance of human eyes pressed close to the glass. My throat tightened as I stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring. Someone had been inside, or maybe still was. I couldn't bring myself to check. Another night, walking home later than usual, I realized something strange about the car's position. It wasn't parked perfectly the same anymore. Barely an inch difference, but I knew. The bumper that had once lined with a crack in the sidewalk no longer matched. It had shifted, only slightly, just enough to be undeniable. And then came the smell. On certain nights, when the wind carried just right, a faint odor drifted up from that corner. Not the sharp stink of gasoline or oil. Something heavier, rancid, like old meat left to rot in the summer sun. It was faint enough that I wondered if I imagined it. But once I noticed, I couldn't unnotice. The black car didn't just look wrong, it smelled wrong. Sleep stopped coming easily. I would lie awake, staring at my ceiling, listening for sounds from the street. Every creak of the building, every distant bark of a dog, every rush of tires passing somewhere beyond. It all left me waiting, listening for something more. And sometimes I thought I heard it. A soft creak of a door, a shuffle on the pavement, the almost inaudible sound of weight shifting inside a car seat. There were nights when I forced myself to look out the window, pulling back the curtain with shaking hands. The car would sit there, still and silent, as though mocking my fear. But there were moments, tiny, fleeting, when I thought I saw something in the driver's seat. A shape, darker than the darkness around it, not moving, just sitting. I started counting the nights. 1 month, 2, 3. By then, it wasn't even the fear of what it was anymore. It was the realization that no one else noticed. Neighbors passed by, joggers circled the block, kids played nearby in the afternoons. Not once did anyone seem to question the car. Not once did anyone stop to look. It was as though it only existed for me. And then one night, something changed. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Not a call, not a message, just the faint vibration of a notification. I blinked into the dark, rubbed at my eyes, and for some reason, I looked toward the window. Through the thin gap in the curtain, I saw light. 2 circles of pale yellow cutting through the black. Headlights. The black car's headlights were on. They didn't move. They didn't brighten. They just stayed fixed, aimed directly toward my building, burning faintly against the walls. My breath caught in my throat. My room felt smaller, suffocating. I wanted to pull away, to shut the curtains tighter, but I couldn't. My eyes stayed glued to the glow. Minutes passed. 10. 20. The lights never flickered, never dimmed. They just stared. By the time I finally forced myself back into bed, heart hammering, dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon. And when I dared to look again, the lights were off. The car was still there. It is always still there. And as I sit here telling this, I know it will be there tomorrow. Waiting at the corner, watching, never leaving. And maybe, just maybe, one night soon, it won't just wait anymore. There's something about nighttime that never sits right with me. It's not just the dark or the silence or the way everything feels slower. It's the sense that, in the absence of daylight, the world starts watching you back. The empty streets, the windows with blinds half shut, the stillness that isn't really still if you listen long enough. I had always brushed those thoughts away as paranoia, until the night I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being photographed. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special about it. The kind of night where you're just waiting to get home, maybe take a shower, maybe let the exhaustion of the day swallow you whole. I left work later than usual and decided to cut through the park near my apartment complex. It wasn't a big park, just a patch of grass, a few scattered trees, and a children's playground with paint that was already peeling from the swings and slides. The lamps there gave off a weak orange glow, buzzing faintly like insects trapped in glass. The air smelled damp, like the ground hadn't fully dried from a rainstorm earlier in the day. I could hear the faint slosh of water dripping from branches above me. Every step I took pressed into wet earth, soft and sticky under my shoes. Normally, I would have stuck to the sidewalks, but the park cut my walk by several minutes, and I was too tired to care. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked just off the side of the road, on the far edge of the park where the pavement curved into a dead-end street. A dark sedan, older model, with paint that seemed to drink in the lamplight rather than reflect it. At first, I thought nothing of it. Cars park there sometimes, especially people who live in the buildings nearby. But something about this one rooted me to the spot. Maybe it was the way it seemed too deliberately placed, angled so it faced the stretch of park I was walking across. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. I shifted my bag on my shoulder and kept moving. The grass whispered as I dragged my shoes through it. The night air felt colder than it should have, slipping against my skin with that heavy dampness that makes you want to shiver. I didn't. I just kept my head down. Then came the sound. A faint clicking noise, sharp and unnatural against the quiet. Not like the crack of a twig or the buzz of a street lamp. More precise. Mechanical. I froze, my breath clouding faintly in front of me. Click. A pause. Click again. My eyes went to the car, and for the first time I saw it. A faint glimmer, like a shard of light catching glass. The unmistakable reflection of a camera lens. Someone was inside the car, and they were taking pictures of me. At first, I couldn't process it. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe someone was testing a camera. Maybe they were photographing the park. Maybe, but every rationalization collapsed when the lens shifted. Not sweeping across the trees, not wandering over the playground. It followed me. My steps, my pauses, every move I made. I could almost feel the weight of the shutter every time it clicked. It wasn't just a sound. It was like a small wound pricking my skin, marking me. Click. My hand tightened on the strap of my bag. Click. I forced myself to walk faster, pretending I didn't see it, didn't hear it. My heart began to pound against my ribs like it was trying to warn me, trying to drag me out of that open patch of grass. The car didn't move. It didn't need to. The camera lens tracked me with surgical precision, every flash of light reflecting back into the dark interior where the face of whoever held it remained hidden. I made it to the edge of the park and onto the sidewalk. The sound stopped. The clicking died, replaced only by the faint hum of a distant streetlight. I didn't dare look back. I kept walking, each step heavy, my breath shallow and ragged. But the sense of it stayed with me. That weight, that presence pressing into the back of my neck, into my spine. Even when the car was no longer in sight, I could feel it. Like an invisible thread had been tied between me and whoever was inside that vehicle, pulling tight with every step I took away. When I reached my apartment, I didn't go inside right away. I lingered by the entrance, hidden partially behind a hedge, and looked back down the street. From that distance, I could still see the faint outline of the sedan, still parked, still pointed toward the park. No headlights, no sound, just waiting. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the building, every car door outside, every buzz of an insect against the screen made me jolt. My curtains stayed tightly shut. I kept imagining the lens pointed up at my window, the silent click of a shutter capturing me while I lay in bed. I told myself the next morning that it was nothing, a coincidence, someone out late testing equipment. I almost believed it, until I saw the car again. It was parked in the same place, same angle, same dark windows. Only now, it was daylight, and something about seeing it in the morning made it worse. The sunlight didn't soften it, it made it clearer. Too ordinary, too still, like a prop placed in the wrong scene. I avoided the park that day, took the long way around. But even from the main street, I felt it again. That pull, that sensation of being observed through glass. That night, the clicking returned. I don't know how to describe what it's like to hear a camera shutter when you know it's aimed at you. It doesn't just echo, it embeds itself. I was walking back from the store, the plastic bag of groceries digging into my fingers, when the sound came again. Click. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to turn to know where it was coming from. The same car, the same place. Only this time it was closer, parked halfway down my block. The street lamps flickered weakly, throwing patches of orange against the pavement. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, swallowing corners of the sidewalk. The car sat in one of those shadows, perfectly still, perfectly quiet except for that shutter. Click. I didn't breathe. Click. My hands were trembling, so hard the bag rustled loud enough to make me flinch. I forced myself forward, trying not to break into a run. Every step was a battle between instinct and fear. The world felt too quiet, too hollow, like all the normal sounds of the neighborhood had been sucked away. All that remained was the clicking. When I finally reached my apartment and slammed the door behind me, my entire body shook. My groceries spilled onto the floor. I didn't even care. I pressed my back against the door, listening, waiting. But there was nothing. Just silence. That was weeks ago, and the car hasn't left. Sometimes it moves, different corners, different angles, but it's always there when night falls. Sometimes I hear the shutter from the safety of my apartment, muffled but distinct enough to know. Other times I don't hear it at all, and that's worse. Because silence means I don't know where it is, or if it's aimed at me at that very moment. I don't go through the park anymore. I barely go outside at night. But it doesn't matter. The car follows. I'll see it near the grocery store, parked across the street from the laundromat. Once, I swear it was sitting in the lot behind my building, angled so the lens could peer directly at my window. I don't know who's in there. I've never seen their face. Just that glimmer of glass catching the light, just that shutter cutting through the silence. And maybe that's the worst part. It's not knowing why. Why me? Why the photos? Why the persistence? If it's a stranger, if it's someone I know, if it's just one person or more. Every click feels like a piece of me being stolen, cataloged, stored somewhere I'll never see. Now I keep my curtains closed at all times. I've taped the edges shut. I unplugged every light that might silhouette me against the window. I've stopped using the park, stopped walking at night, stopped trying to convince myself it was harmless. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter, because the car is still there, always waiting, always watching, and the camera never runs out of film.